We're
Trenna,
impressed.
I am impressed by that color coordination and commitment
Thank
to
you.
brand.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well,
It is-
look, I'm all style, no substance.
That's
Oh, that's
absolutely
not true.
true. Well, Trenna, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We've been wanting to get you on this podcast for ages. So I'm so glad that we could make the time. And I know you're about to go on a holiday.
Well,
You've managed to fit us in.
It's a pretty funny holiday, actually, because it's actually 3 female founders and 3 female funders all jumping on a plane and heading to Bali. And the first thing that I did was find a way that you can actually order a whole desktop setup over there. So it's actually for me at the hotel.
That's amazing. Wow.
And US $30 for a month.
So there's a service that does this?
There's a service that does it, a digital nomad service. And I don't know if you know that Bali has now got a digital nomad visa.
I didn't. I imagine our listeners want to hear.
Yeah, well, and as someone who's soon to be homeless, it's a very interesting option for me right now.
Effective over there.
I may not be coming back, people, just to be honest.
Well, there are worse places to be stranded than Bali.
So. Yeah, I think so. John and I got stranded in South Africa together. That's where we're
Well, I was just telling the guys whether Trenna would remember Steve Irwin's erection or not.
So funny. I was going to send through some jokes last night about the death rolls with the crocodiles, but I wasn't sure if you would remember.
Oh no, I never forget an erection. Yeah, no, that was a great.
I mean, I was so gypped. So I thought that we came out with our skit first, and I thought we were pretty good. Like we were all in. We thought we were going to be pretty dead set, and then Don came over and just cleaned the floor with us. So yeah, wow. I might get over it one day. I'm not very competitive, really.
Don
and Annie Lou the other day on LinkedIn, and I uploaded the video of that whole skit.
Oh, do you that video?
Yeah, you want me to send it to you?
Yes.
And then there's.
I feel like you should explain to the listeners why you were doing skits, because
explain why Steve Irwin had an erection.
Yeah.
Well, we were with that to yourself.
We were with Creel Price, who had run a trip to the Branson Institute, and we were mentoring some entrepreneurs over there, which was a lot of fun. And I guess as a team building exercise, we were split up into groups, and we had to. So Creel, correct me if I'm wrong, Trenna, Creel had the entrepreneurial eye, which was the world's most complex decision-making framework. But
I feel like your memory may be better for this than me.
Yeah. And so we had to build in decision-making and ways of decision-making to help the planet and help the environment. And our skits had to be around that. And for some reason, I was traveling with a mullet wig. I don't really know why.
It was truly excellent, I have to say. It's the fact that I'm still remembering this so many years on. And at the time, I actually think I'm not going to win Mother of the Year award here, because I'm pretty sure I'd left a 3-month-old baby at home in Australia. So I'm just calling in baby brain for why I can't remember all the details. Sally Ann and I shared a room, actually, Don. I'm not sure if you remember that. And whenever I'm seeing her being very serious all over LinkedIn and so on, I'm like, I remember some other moments in South Africa.
Oh, Trenna, that's good to know, because I sit on her board. So thank you for dropping that little tidbit. But the reference to the skits did bring in Creel Price, which is a part of your background, and maybe a good place to start on this podcast, because we absolutely do want to get to what you're doing at the moment with Super Fierce. But I would love us to talk a little bit about your background, because before Super Fierce, because I think you and I met probably about 10 years ago now, I think.
I was going to say 19 million years ago, but yeah, it probably was only 10. A lot longer than that.
It was when you were working with Creel, but you've had a history before that.
Yeah, well, I am nearly 51, so yeah, I've had plenty of history before that.
Yeah, wow. In your 6th decade. That's what that is amazing. You look like you're in your 3rd decade, but nevertheless, I feel like people's backgrounds.
Appropriate t-shirts. So you're always in the like the branded t-shirts, and I thought, oh my God, I better wear a branded t-shirt for the podcast. And then I got Vegemite all over me. I was just like, we're just going to roll with it anyway.
I feel like that's a metaphor for entrepreneurship, actually. But yeah, maybe talk about your background, because I feel like it informs people's later choices. And you've had a really interesting background, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that path and I guess how it led you to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to give you the short version of that. I suspect that possibly like a lot of entrepreneurs, there's a thin line where you may have become a criminal or an entrepreneur, which I've certainly said before. And there's a healthy lack of respect for boundaries, perhaps, or in my case, just a complete obliviousness to their existence, honestly, when I was growing up, I think. And yes, I come from a country family in the southeast of South Australia. My parents were both, this will sound weird, but I think they were the respective black sheep of both their families, and everybody else was on the land, but they were pretty cerebral and adventurers as well. And so went into education, and we traveled a lot. So I grew up traveling. We lived in the center of Australia. We lived in the far north of Australia. We lived in Canada. We were always arguing, learning, adventuring. And I think that really just set the foundation for the way that I viewed the world. But also my dad also had a very strong sense of social justice and was very involved in setting up education for Indigenous populations. And that's how we ended up back of Burke, basically, living in a tiny coal mining town that doesn't actually exist anymore because, shock horror, they found a lot of coal underneath it and had to shift the town. But I think that really set the path for the journey that I went on through my life, which frankly has just been a big mess. I've always been reasonably intelligent, pretty capable at lots of different things. I was good at sport, I was good at music, I was good at debating. But when I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 40, that's when I think I worked out why I didn't quite ever really get things to stick. And I always had a burning energy to do lots and do it as fast as possible and to do as much as possible. Sleep, completely unnecessary. I'm rocking 4 hours a night at the moment. And for me, that's a huge achievement. So sleep's never been a big thing for me and just meant I could fit lots in. But yeah, so school was interesting, smashed through that, went to uni really early, too early. And that led to a pretty important part of my story where I was studying economics. I was hating it, hated the fact that my really hot boyfriend, who was older than me, was actually going to go work in America for the summer. I'm like, well, bugger that. I'm going to Japan. And that's actually where I met Craig, who's now my husband. We were golf caddies working in Japan. And I think that kind of sets the tone of how I operate those. When I encounter like a little bump in the road, my answer to that is you just go straight over the fucker. Am I allowed to swear? Sorry, everybody, bleep that thing out.
No, absolutely. We do all the time.
But yeah, and so we were working at a time where, the crazy amounts of money. I was 19 years old, but because I was intense, I went and worked in a bar at night, made more money, and then traveled the world a bit. And I think that's just how I've always been wired. And it really created a lot of different opportunities for me. So I ended up back in Adelaide, so another Adelaide girl, Elaine, and worked at what was the Hyatt then, and just met amazing people. And again, I think that is a feature of my life, is that I am compelled, despite deep social anxiety, actually, which is something I've worked very hard to overcome. And people find that pretty surprising knowing me now, but it was pretty crippling. But I've always been deeply drawn to people and just can't resist talking to them, much to my younger son's constant embarrassment. Like, it's impossible for me not to talk to all the people, hug all the children, pat all the dogs, smell all the flowers. And I think through that, so many opportunities arose for me. And I made friends with this bloke who was actually the writer of Flatliners, this American guy who was staying in the hotel. He offered me a job, ended up in Sydney, and just went on this crazy journey from there. And the feature that is really common from there is I never got a real job really ever again. Jobs were created for me and around my skills. And so the people who could look past my age and what I looked like and things like that, a lot skinnier, a lot more attractive back then, just as tall, saw something in me. And that was probably my ability to find unusual solutions to problems that they cared about. And it took courage on their part. They would hold the doors open for me, keep all of the naysayers at bay, and just held on for the ride and trusted that my weird and wacky ideas would deliver results. And yeah, more often not, they did. And I was working at American Express, and yeah, I've been there for 6 years, and I felt like that was a very long time, which at that age it was. And so I talked my way into a big redundancy. It took me about 6 months to sort that little baby out, and I was after it so hard. Sorry, Amex, thank you. But that let me achieve my goal, which was to set up my first business before I turned 30. And so I got him by the hair of my chinny chin and did that. And for me, that was just a really big, exciting achievement. And it was good and it was bad. It was good because I achieved the goal and I was super good at winning business. I executed really well. I was absolutely fucking awful at getting paid, ended up in court, like so many tough lessons through that business. And one of my big life philosophies, which I suspect is just a way of just trying to reframe the fact that I fuck up all the time, is that I just try to make sure that I always take at least one learning out of each thing so that I can do better next time. And yeah, and so that's really my philosophy, which is fail to fierce. How am I going to go from fucking up to turning that into some little nugget that I can use from there? And that's what I did. And then ended up single mum in a really tough situation, having to borrow money from my parents so that I could actually start my life again at the age of 34. And yeah, and again, I think it's just where this resourcefulness and this energy to just keep going has always stood me in good stead. I won't lie, like I was like bottoming out big time. I was an absolute mess. Things were really tough, but I just got lucky again. And so having good people in my life and being able to reach out. But more importantly, I think I didn't know that you're meant to be embarrassed about these things or ashamed or not to tell people or ask the questions. Again, not finding out about ADHD until I was halfway through my life, probably not a bad thing in some ways. And so I ended up, got a job running a financial planning business with a mortgage consultancy. And then that's when Craig came back into my life, we'd been friends all the time at his first wedding years before that. But yeah, they had some jobs going at Macquarie and I was like, ooh, I've always wanted to work somewhere fancy and serious like that, but they're not going to let someone like me in there, surely. And it is genuinely like crawling over broken glass, like the test. I was just like going, whoa, brain blowing up, but ended up getting into Macquarie and started off working in the agricultural funds management business, which was really exciting. I just loved it. I did so many cool, weird things. I worked on massive transactions, doing research and buying cattle stations with zero experience. Macquarie, not sure if this was a great idea. With zero experience, they had me build the entire OH&S manuals and programs and training for all of the staff in the Paraway Pastoral Company. And because I think about things differently, again, it ended up being an awarded piece of work. But they all thought I was mad at first, but it was very successful because I'm like, these guys, they don't talk a lot. Pretty sure they don't read a lot. So there was lots of color and there was photos and there was videos and just those different ways of doing things. Anyway, in the end, my last proper job, as I call it, was I ended up as head of strategy for Asia Pacific for Macquarie Private Bank. And again, amazing connections, really interesting opportunities, and discovered, probably Craig's fault, and took me years to learn to do this, that I am actually genuinely a nerd. I've got my own glasses on here, really. But yeah, and that I just love this shit. What I loved the most was alternative investments and working on real assets, talking to the major pension funds in the US and things like that. And then this is actually not a prop, this is genuinely by my desk, in a interesting turn of events, fell in love with Craig. I'd say he pursued me relentlessly, but that's probably up for debate. But this was his first ever present to me. So romantic.
And for those listening at home, it's the intelligent investor. Or the intelligent asset allocator. Sorry.
Yeah, how to build your portfolio to maximize returns and minimize risk.
That's
so
just
romantic.
romance.
First gift I gave him was a t-shirt, hot pink, and it just says colorblind bogan on it. And now our 19-year-old wears that all the time.
I feel much better because my wife was forced to do a personality test on the 4th date. So that's good to know. Good to know there's...
We can all hang out because is that your ex-wife or the new one?
No, the new one. I was learning.
The
new one sounds almost like transient.
Sorry, that was probably very clumsy, but we can all hang out because Craig and I used to nerd out all the time guessing people's MBTI profiles. And then at dinner parties, we would ask surreptitious questions to try and see if we could work it out and then debrief afterwards and do little assessments of people. To all our friends.
Don does that.
So sorry.
Don does that.
So sorry. But yeah, so the tumultuous, and we're not even there yet, right? And I've been banging on for way too long. And
not at all. This is great.
What are you doing the rest of the day? Because I feel like this podcast might need 3 or 4 hours.
There's so much to unpack in that journey. I don't quite know where to start because I'm a bit like Don normally is at the moment, where I've got a million things going through my mind that I actually want to zero or double down on. But there's a couple of patterns that you talked about that I think we see with almost every entrepreneur we work with, right? So one is this kind of...
that we're unemployable?
Yes, that is one for sure. The other is this healthy lack of respect for or acknowledgement of boundaries. The relentlessness of just continuing to get on with it, even when things are really challenging. Just as you said, I think just power through that speed bump. One of the things you said in that description was that you didn't realize you were supposed to be embarrassed about your failures. And I think that's such an interesting perspective because I think against the backdrop of the tall poppy syndrome and the Australian desire to cut people down, I don't think explains everything. I think most of us are socially conditioned to be very worried about that. So where do you think that comes from, Trenna? And how much do you think that instructs your success to date?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been thinking about this quite a lot lately because one of the things that I love most in life is being a mother. And I take that really seriously, trying to lead from in front, but also get to their level and learn from them and so on. And when they've got little speed bumps in their life and they're all different, is how do you support them to approach those in their way as well? And not everybody is going to be as mad and fast and furious as I am. But I look back to probably in my mind's eye right now, I would have been about probably 13 or 14. And I'd won a scholarship to go to a private school in Adelaide. And I did not fit in at all. And I'm going to let you know, I'm not turning this up. I was literally the weirdest kid you could ever meet. And if there's anybody out there listening who knew me then, call in and let them know. She was really fucking weird. And I look back at some of the stuff I did and it's a mirror. I really didn't have friends. I had a couple of friends. I think they were very just either desperate or sympathetic. I'm not 100% sure. And I was just away in my own world. And I look back at some of the weird stuff that I would do at school. And I look back at that now and I just go, who are you? Who is this weird alien? And how did you end up here? And how on earth did you not know that behavior was not normal and not okay? But I was clueless. Like I just truly was clueless. Now, it wasn't comfortable though. I'm not going to lie. It was horrendous for me. I was bullied horribly. I couldn't understand why people didn't like me because I didn't know I was weird. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to behave that way. And so
just on that, Trenna, is that a consequence, do you think, of your parents? Did your parents always make you feel accepted? Or do you think you just were like not able to pick up on...
My dad is definitely pretty odd. A lot of people would suggest that my dad, myself, and Ashton, who you met before, my 19-year-old, are all triplets separated by decades. And if I was to describe Ashton to you, to provide a metaphor for Ashton, I'd plonk a big blender down on the table and no animals or Yodas were harmed in this metaphor, by the way, but I'd throw in a black Labrador puppy and then I'd throw in Yoda and mix them up. And for me, that's how I would describe Ashton: joyous and playful, and everybody adores him, and he's charismatic, but very deep and wise and thoughtful and considered. And my dad is probably a slightly madder version of that, quite eccentric, very charismatic, charming, kind, intelligent. And so I grew up in a world where we adventured and we're amongst lots of different types of people. But I've always lived in my head a great deal. And so it has been, and I still do have a very vibrant internal conversation going on all the time. And it is exhausting, but it is that makes me continue to be interested and strive and want to grow and learn and do different things. And it's also why I care so deeply about the things that I see are wrong in the world. And so that discomfort that I felt through my teenage years, that's continued really, I'd say probably until maybe my mid-40s. And I was bullied horrendously at work in my 20s. I was bullied horrendously at work in my 30s. I've experienced that in really deep, damaging ways for many years, but I've done the work to harness what I can from that, what I can learn from that, to claim for myself the right to be okay with being different or not right. And so to your point before, Elaine, something that makes me furious, and it might have been your post I might have commented on about this, which is that people are going to stumble. People are going to fall. We're not going to get it right all the time. And in fact, it's just fucking stupid, right? You think about kids. Now, when they start to learn a bike, do we say, oh, geez, you're shit, mate, don't get on that bike again, like you wobbled, dumb fuck? No, of course we don't. We expect them to wobble, and then we steer them along, and when they fall, you put a Band-Aid on their knee and you cheer them on. You go, get on it, let's keep going, let's keep going. That's how we learn. Now, life is so much trickier to learn to ride than a bike. And yet we show little support or empathy or concern for others. And I think this is tremendously important in every walk of life, particularly as we have children now coming into a world where change is so fast. The future is so uncertain and unknown in a way that nobody has ever really experienced before, where the jobs, we can't understand what they're going to be because we're creating this new world so fast. So if we don't bring them up to understand that experimentation and that discovery and that learning journey is going to involve bumps and trips and stumbles, and it's what you learn and gather from that in the moment that is going to take you forward. It's how we're going to create new amazing worlds. And it's why I get the flying shits as well in Australia, that as soon as an entrepreneur stumbles, as soon as somebody's business doesn't go as well as it should, and it's dark out there at the moment, people. I just came back from Intersect recently, and I've never seen such a grumbly bunch of fintech entrepreneurs. And they're not my favorite type. Sorry, guys. They're normally pretty good to be around. And it was pretty dark, right? And yet there's not an honest conversation about what this means. I would love for there to be less lip service and more genuine action, more genuine activity to support founders and entrepreneurs and scientists and innovators through that journey, knowing that they are going to fail. If they don't fail, they're not fucking trying hard or pushing far enough. And yet
it becomes a recipe for mediocrity.
On my soapbox here.
No,
sorry.
I know. I agree with everything you're saying 100%. And I think the boys are nodding furiously as well. But I think it's a recipe.
Let us get a word in edgewise.
No,
you are speaking
all
of my
podcast, not ours.
It's a recipe for mediocrity is what I think happens when we do not tolerate or have some empathy for trips and stumbles and failures.
And early on,
then we're disincentivizing people from trying. And yet as a nation, as an economy, we rely upon those innovations. We rely upon these businesses. And so I truly believe something that I've been thinking about a lot is that as investors, as consumers, as media commentators, that we need to be there along the journey with these founders, with these innovators, and instead of just saying, "Are you okay?" or "We care about mental health," what are we actually practically going to do? So the incidence of depression in founders is 30% higher than the national average. As a founder, you put everything on the line. You give up so much. Like, my business is all about the thing that helps me to get out of bed at 3 a.m. and so on, not just ADHD, is when I think about 38% of Australians retiring into poverty, that the fastest growing homeless demographic are single women over the age of 55. When I think about myself at 34, starting my whole life again after working so hard after being a mother, when I look at myself now, I think about these women, and it's a bit dramatic, but when I'm cuddled up in bed and I don't want to get up and I'm like, okay, and I imagine an older woman in a sleeping bag, hopefully under a bridge, fucking lonely and terrified and forgotten. And I'm not okay with that. And as a founder, as a 51 nearly year old founder as well, the sacrifices are immense. There are many moments where I wake up just going, holy shit, you could be that bird under a bridge one day. So for my friends out there, I may need to surf your couches one day. But again, to that point of that relentlessness, even though I feel the fear, like, I'm not an idiot, right? I feel it. I feel the fear, but the purpose and the mission, the things that I care about, the people, the humanity, that matters to me more. I feel like I just can't resist the urge to do that, even though I know that I'm more likely to fail than succeed, even though I know that I'm unemployable and holy fuck, what am I going to do? It's just like, despite, or maybe because of that, but do you know what I mean? And
absolutely.
I wish that we'd see more support for that.
Agreed. And I think Aaron and Don will talk about that in a second. Just one quick comment before Don jumps in. Feeling the fear and going ahead anyway is the definition of courage. And that is another extremely, I don't want to oversell it, but it does require, the whole entrepreneurial journey does require a pretty large dose of courage. Don, you were going to ask a question?
Yeah, I think there's courage, but there's also perspective and normalization that we've been talking about here. So when we first get involved with a portfolio company, the first thing we're doing is teaching them some frameworks and tools for them to actually understand that the only time you don't have problems is when you're dead. And so as long as you are alive, you are going to have problems, and therefore problems are actually an incredibly good thing. The problem that some founders have is that because they don't have that perspective of problems being a good thing, they then don't have the ability to categorize which problems do I need to deal with and which problems do I need to let go through to the keeper that will solve themselves. And what that does is it creates a bit of a better relationship of honesty, because what tends to happen is they raise based on certain things, then problems start to creep up in the background that they don't think are normal. They look at other founders and say, oh, they can't possibly have those challenges. And then they try and go and solve it themselves. Whereas we try and build a culture where the problem is celebrated and we're going to come in and actually help and actually give you the tools and the frameworks. And the reality is 90% of the problems that founders face are actually life cycle normal problems. And it's not that you don't get upset, just like you don't get upset with a screaming child at 2 o'clock in the morning, but that's what they do. The goal is to make sure that they survive until they start sleeping through the night and then get into the adolescence years. And so I really agree with what you're saying, and often just normalizing, hey, problems are par for this course, because that can then free up some mental energy as well. And just
I love that, Don. I wish I was chatting to you guys about a year ago. That would have been really helpful, but it's not too late for me to tap into your frameworks and mental models, because I've been doing it really tough the last 10 months, like really tough. And one of the things, starting from the failed businesses and minor successes and so on is I try to remember the little threads of things when worked, understanding that they change, different circumstances, but trying to hold on and onto that feeling, like the feeling when you get it right, because more often than not, you feel like you're getting it wrong. But I also try not to make the same mistake too many times. Sometimes you have to make it a few times to ultimately learn it. But yeah, one of the things as a founder that I have struggled, I think as an older founder that I have struggled with is that I think that people think that I'm okay and that I know what I'm doing and that I don't need help. And something I've been trying to learn to do better or do differently is because I feel like I'm asking for help, but I must be asking for it wrong. Or maybe I'm asking the wrong people. And I've actually
why is that when you say you feel you might be asking wrong? Why? What's the reaction you're getting?
Well, because I'm not getting the help that I need. And so I'm not getting the help that I need. And so I take responsibility for that, right? So you're either asking the wrong person, you're asking them in the wrong way, you're asking the wrong question, it's the wrong time, it's something not quite right. Now, things have actually shifted significantly for me lately because I've found a couple of people who have suddenly gone all in, like they've rolled up their sleeves, they're actually genuinely helping me. And some of the context there is that it's not widely known, but on the 22nd of November last year, my husband had a significant stroke. And sorry, I'll get upset.
Well, that's all right. Absolutely. Take a moment.
Just while Trenna is taking a moment, Trenna has had an exceptionally hard year. And one of the things that I've been most impressed by with Trenna is, so it's interesting, Trenna, that you say you feel like you've been asking for help, but it hasn't been heard, or you're asking it wrong. I actually think you've been very brave in asking for help. I've seen you do that quite a few times. It's sad, actually, though, that you haven't received more help, because having to take care of your husband during that period of time, I think you had to move states and house. You have your kids.
It's a miracle you think my backdrop is good because I'm actually surrounded by boxes.
We all are. That's again another metaphor.
Just don't look past the shiny surface too far.
There's always a difference.
I guess but just while you're catching your breath a little bit, the challenge is because you do come across so competent and so under control, people often do mistake. No one knows what's happening in people's lives in the background. It's why the comment you made before about empathy is so important, because you do not know what people are battling in the background, and you cannot take people's face value or their face that they show to the public as an accurate reflection of what is happening in the background. And you've been growing your business in amongst all of that, and it has been a real struggle. But I understand Craig is on the mend, which is wonderful
Craig
news.
is on the mend. We're so lucky. We went from him being in a coma, unable to see, unable to speak, unable to move, to I've got him back at the coalface and earning money again. So it's still definitely a journey, and he's getting to know himself again. I'm getting to know him again, and we're getting to know ourselves again. And it's actually a really beautiful, precious opportunity, actually. But I don't want to give the impression that people haven't been there, because they have. There have been people who have been generous, but the reality is people have their own stuff going on. And I feel like I've made some pretty big mistakes this year, but I'm also very proud of myself. I think it's a miracle that the business is still alive, honestly. I've kept my husband alive. I've kept my family afloat. I've kept my business alive. We've got some really significant opportunities at the moment. It's still tough, really tough. But yeah, I've been reflecting on these things a lot because of this. And so it's also being able to hold people to account. And so what I always say to people, and I probably will sound like an asshole, but what I always say to people when they offer to help is I go, okay, I'm so grateful. I love that. Please don't take this the wrong way. I'm not asking you to do this. I need to have your commitment that if you say you're going to do it, you're actually going to do it. because otherwise what happens is I think you've got it. And then if you don't, it drops. And in a startup, that's fatal, right? It's absolutely fatal. And so I have really had some significant challenges. And so one of the things that I would urge your listeners to do is not be wary about offering help. Please don't be wary about offering help, but make sure you think that through very carefully beforehand. Is it what's needed? Are you the right person? Can you find the right person? What's the frame? Do you need compensation for you to actually prioritize that? Those sorts of things. And so one of my big growing up lessons this year is to be willing and to have the courage to hold people to account who they don't report to me. I haven't employed them. And that can be the really hard things with advisors and those sorts of people as well. But we've turned the corner. I've got some I'm just so grateful to these two incredible women who have just stepped in. Kate's come in. She's working 3 days a week in my business. She's got going on, Kate Freeman, and somebody else whose name I'm not going to say because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to yet. She's coming in as our tech advisor. She's busy under the bonnet. She's working with me on a project that I'd wanted to get up for so long, but just couldn't get the right skills around me in commercializing our data. This could be this huge B2B SaaS play for us, unlocking the value of this huge asset that we've got, but I haven't been able to get there, and just getting the right person. And sometimes it's luck, right? I think that's important to understand as well. Like you got to be open to it. You got to create the luck as well, but luck's luck as well. I just feel like I got super lucky finding these two incredible women. And I got to call it out. I'm not just saying it because you're on the call. Like, Elaine, you've been the person who sends the message. What's that GIF, which is you as beautiful, you as kind, you as good. That it makes me cry each time, and it always arrives just when I need it. And it can be that simple. So thank
just sending memes. That's my plan. Aaron, I can see you're bursting to ask a question. So what are you going?
Well, I just wanted to double down on that whole thread. I don't know you as well as Don and Elaine do, Trenna, but my perspective of you is someone just incredibly courageous, not just for what you've described of stepping into entrepreneurship and all those things, but your vulnerability. Like Brene Brown says, that's the ultimate courage, is to be vulnerable. And I think your point was spot on about you. Like, I see someone such as yourself who is doing all these things and being vulnerable and courageous. And I think, wow, you've really got it sorted. And I think there is a lesson in this in terms of what you're framing for others around not knowing how to help someone. And so we give these token statements and we make these offers without commitment, and we actually don't know what it truly takes to show up for someone else. And I think one thing I'd love to see is all of us investing a little more in learning how to show up for others in these moments, whether it is a meme or something more meaningful. But
asking the question in a different way works for me though as well. So one of the things that I love doing the most is, particularly for women, but for some really beautiful men as well who are willing to do that, is just to be there to listen when they don't know and to ask the question in a different way. And it's how you reframe the question sometimes, because people will come to me for career advice a lot. And they're always surprised when I say, okay, not what do you want to do? What do you want to work? I think, why do we not ask that question more? People think when I interview them for jobs and so on, they're probably just going, what's going on here? But I want to know who they are as a human. I want to know how are you going to bring your best during the day? And if I know how you want to feel, like what makes you feel great, then that's a great secret sauce. But that's a little bit fluffy. But I think in the context of what we're talking about, it's asking questions in a different way, but also being willing to be very quiet and listen differently as well. So we've all been in corporations and meetings and so on, and everybody's thinking ahead to what they're going to say, right? And not really necessarily listening to what's going on, being agile. Now, I'm not perfect at this, like particularly in startup land and when you've got crazy deadlines, and I don't suffer fools gladly. You know, I can be impatient, and when I'm a systems thinker, I can already see it. I don't understand why we're not there already. Like, I can see it. Why can't you build it? But I'm always trying to coach myself to slow down. But I would like us to all be more patient. But it's interesting you talk about the vulnerability. Again, it's not a deliberate thing, actually. It's what I'm thinking and feeling, and so I say it. And Kate's demanding that I do this more, so you'll start to see me being more active now. But which is, if we're not honest about these things, then it creates it's just like we're missing so many opportunities to grow and learn together, because we all feel this shit. Like none of us are fooled. Like, we know we're all human. We're all doing this. And so for me, I would much rather be honest about my challenges or the way that I'm feeling or the things that I'm worried about, because my experience shows me that it gives people permission to do the same, or it gives them the courage to do the same. And I think that's important.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And if we're not honest about it, it'll come out eventually. It'll just come out in some very unhealthy way.
In a very bad way at the wrong time.
Sorry, Don.
Well, I was just because I can't help myself but look at different patterns. But just one of the things, if this was a broader conversation, I think the two people that you've got some really great support from at the moment sound like they've really bought in and understand what you're trying to do. And one of the things we find with entrepreneurs is that the counterparty tends to engage when they hear or read words that resonate with their story. Humans are a very funny set of critters in that our brains are always scanning the universe or what's in it for us. And whatever words and stories and stuff has resonated there, if you're not getting traction elsewhere, it's, am I talking to the right people, and can I be putting forth stuff that activates their story first that could hopefully then connect to mine? And that's where I see some of those overlapping patterns.
It's just hard to do that when you're drowning, right? When you're really drowning, it's hard to think that strategically about the way that you ask for help, though, as well. Like, it is.
Yeah.
And you triggered something, and I'll call myself out on this behavior as someone who sometimes over commits and says yes to things. But I got a message a little while ago that I then resolved afterwards. Hi, Don, it's time you either keep me or cut me. You help me a lot. Sorry to sound unappreciative, but now I'm missing what you do. Please, can you give me a call? And I let that guy down. I had said yes. I'd done a number of sessions, and then my third child comes. And I especially have to be very wary of not letting down people in that manner. And so thank you for giving me a good little tap on that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, Don, because I think that one of the challenges there, this is my biggest piece of personal work this year, is giving myself permission sometimes to not be okay, to acknowledge that I can't be and do all of the things. I know that I have been letting certain people down. I'm not reconnecting with them or responding as rapidly and being as supportive as I would typically like to be. And one of the challenges with that for me, with Craig being unwell, is that we haven't talked about that broadly, because his brain is his brand. It's everything to him. And so I was wanting to be very respectful of that and protecting that. And we're just very fortunate where he is now. He's like killing it, but it's still a journey. And the hard part of that for me is that I haven't been able to let many people know what's actually going on. And so that has created a bit of a barrier to getting that additional sort of at least understanding and support. And it's not a complaint, it's just a reality. But I think that for me this year, I've just gone, I don't have the luxury of falling apart. When Craig had his stroke, I was already burnt out. I was already scraping the bottom of the barrel. My mental health was shot really bad. And then that happened. And so what I will say to any founders out there, what I'll say to everybody, is you have more internal resources that you can draw upon. Then there's more rocket fuel down there and I made a promise to myself a week ago that if I make it to the 23rd of November, when I make it to the 23rd of November, I'm actually having a ceremony for myself. I'm getting a trophy made, and I'm going to give myself a trophy for best on ground. And then I thought, well, that's a bit selfish, Tren. So I'm going to get 2 other trophies. I'm going to get one for Craig. I thought quiet achievers appropriate, given he couldn't talk for quite a while. And then for our 10-year-old, he's getting best and fairest, because he's just been an absolute trooper and been my right hand, helping me to look after his dad and wiping up my tears when I haven't felt like I could cope with it all. So anybody who wants to come to my ceremony on the 23rd of November, you're all welcome.
That's awesome.
I absolutely love that. Love that. Some rituals and artifacts to celebrate.
I like that, Aaron. Yeah. Rituals and artifacts. Let's touch on that quickly, because something that we do at Super Fierce, it's how I live my life as well, but is making sure we celebrate the little moments, the silly moments. And so we have Super Fierce quotes. Whenever somebody says something funny or silly or occasionally smart, I do it up in a tile and send it around the team, and we celebrate the small moments. And I think that's one of the great things of being an older entrepreneur, is I know that sometimes all you have left is a T-shirt and memories. So really making sure you enjoy them, making sure that you frame.
Sometimes you don't even get the T-shirt.
Yeah, this time I made myself a T-shirt. Do you know what I mean? So
the gift of perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah, and giving yourself permission to enjoy the journey. I think sometimes we forget to do that because we're so focused on where we're meant to be. And I had a pretty brutal reminder the other day that, I'm nowhere near where I wanted to be with this business. You never are, but maybe a few people are. I'll just tell myself no, you never are. But
no, we can assure you no one ever is.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I was just like, and I thought, and I was a little bit despondent, and I was like, no, actually, just this time, I'm giving you permission to pat yourself on the back. Like, here you are. There are businesses failing left and center. There's no capital around, or it's not being, distributed in the same way. Customers are holding onto their pennies. They're worried. Like, things are tough. Everybody's exhausted. I'm not sure if everybody remembers the significant impact of COVID on the psyche of everybody. And then you've got these economic uncertainty. And so I feel that there is just this little cloud. And so I would like everybody to remember to give yourself a bit of a break and give everybody else a bit of a break. It's been a tough time.
Well, that self-care, I think, is really important. The other pattern I see is people that are the more for purpose your business is and you as an entrepreneur think, the more you put on your own shoulders to go and solve that. And the more frustration you get when others don't react with the same passion. And so the self-care at that for purpose, for passion space is really important, because and I hear it coming through, you can't help but bring the world upon your shoulders to try and solve it. And then the problem is there's you that's there. And so all I can do is double down for you on that self-care is so incredibly important. And there's a reason why, even if you're traveling with your kids on an airplane, let's use Virgin today as a brand, seeing as we keep using other brands, you've got to put the oxygen on yourself first before you even help your own kids.
Yeah, John, I am really bad at it, honestly. And what has been really great recently, and with these 2 women that I've mentioned, and this trip is because Kate has seen that we're exhausted, and this is her gift to us, to give us space. Now, she knows we're going to talk work and we're going to do stuff and so on, but creating that space, and that's an incredible gift. But it's even small things like knowing that, so that I can focus on the strategic work, so that I can focus on the big projects, so that I can look out and up, which is where I am in my space of excellence, right? Not in the weeds. Like, it's just not where I excel. So there was stuff that was just taking so much of my time, and it was draining my happiness and energy as well. And I was doing it badly. So just having those things taken away so that I can focus, that's a huge gift of self-care for me, because it means I can be in the place where I excel and where I feel I'm doing good stuff. And
sorry, Trenna, I don't mean
to
interrupt.
No, you go. I'm talking way too much.
No, I was just, no, you're not at all. You mentioned the 2 women in your business, but they're not the only ones. Super Fierce, I think, is characterized by a pretty high level of diversity, which I think is one of its differentiators. Definitely not its only one, but one of its differentiators. Do you think the fact that you do have such a highly diverse business impacts things like what you just mentioned? The fact that someone's recognized this enough to say, you need a holiday. We're going to do this. We're going to approach it this way differently. Do you think having that diversity allows you as a business to approach what you're doing differently? What do you think the impact has been?
Possibly. When Craig got sick, I called one person, a woman who is an investor, who I've actually known. I've drunk champagne, probably wasn't champagne then, since we were in our 20s. She's incredible and she's a force, and I just trusted her implicitly. And in that moment, and that was very important because she sits on one of the ASX boards that Craig is on. So I've gone straight into crisis communication mode, was my first reaction, tragically. But what then happened from there was what I call my Super Fierce SWAT team suddenly started to form in that moment. And a number of the key investors, and they all came together. And there was a WhatsApp group, and we worked for 3 weeks intensely all together in different ways so that I could then have a week to try and get Craig home and a range of different things. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is that not just women, men, different types of backgrounds and people. And so I think I don't actually have the answer to this, but I've only got an observation of what I am experiencing. For some reason, there seems to be a lot of affection for Super Fierce. And so there are lots of people who are so kind and supportive and reach out and want to see us succeed. Lots of different types of people. And it's certainly not based on what we've managed to achieve so far. Now, I'm not going to talk us down. Totally. We are making huge impacts in Australia. Like, we've improved the retirement positions of Australian by like close to $370 million now, right? That's in just under 18 months. Like, it's a pretty big impact. We're not where we want to be commercially. We're not there with the growth. But popping that aside, I don't know why, to be honest, Elaine, because I just feel that I feel like we are so lucky to have so many incredible people who want to see us succeed, who will take my calls. One of the things I need to get better at, actually, and to your point, I think, Don, is around the systems and structure, is I'm not as good at harnessing that community as I need to be. I think I was, but I'm giving myself the benefit of doubt. I think I probably was good at it. I'm just exhausted this year. But I think that the systems and process thing, I was reflecting on this when I was listening to you speaking before, which is you got to get that stuff in place before you're exhausted. You got to get that stuff in place before things go really wrong. And we need entrepreneurs and startup teams and the investors around them to know that it is going to get really fucking rocky. You're going to try and take this jumbo off, and there's going to be no seat belts and probably no doors, and it's going to be shaky, right? And so you've got to have the systems and processes in place first to get that support through that, I think. Yeah, I think that's what I will try to do better.
There is so much in that answer, Trenna, that is amazing. One little thing there, the SWAT team, like even just that analogy, that who is your group that has your back that you can call upon in those moments. Like, for me, it's this love tribe. It's this circle of friends that we each support each other in those moments.
It's who would I call if I need to bury a body? That's how I view it.
You can always call me, mate. I'm good with a shovel.
And as the person with an excavator, I hope I get a call up.
I think Don and I would be awesome on that together. There might be a few too many jazz hands.
We were having a lovely dinner, and Elaine leans over with her phone and effectively says, "Your ADHD is fuck. You should go and sort that out."
I
probably did say it that way.
It was because of some behaviours that I tend to have, let's call them tics, plus a few other bits and pieces, which then earlier, this prior day, there'd been discussion with a father and his kid with ADHD. And there was a few things that went tick. And so then I went off and had 2 separate psychologists and did all the different bits and pieces, and suddenly could explain myself, could explain all the different stuff. So it's interesting, 40. I was 40, you were 40. What is interesting is it's that scaffolding, I think, in hindsight, that if all the things that I got myself into trouble on, It's not so much the systems and process, because I don't, from what I understand with some of the mental things, it's just we're never going to be able to be perfect at that. We can point out the shit for others, pretty good at that. But internally, it's actually making sure that you keep those people around you that can go and execute.
It's like this stuff. Do you guys know Gino Wickman and Track?
No.
When I found those, that was really powerful for me, even though I got bored pretty quickly reading it because the font was too small and there was no colors and stuff. But I didn't need to go too far, because what was great about it was it actually put a framework around what I already thought and believed. It was just great to be able to put words around it that other people could understand. And my mission, and Kate is this for me at the moment, is I know that my success will come with a great integrator.
It's the external and the internal working as a yin and yang. And that's where because as you're finding, and as we've all experienced, sole foundership at that deep house on the line level is actually really quite difficult, because of all the different plates you've got to spin and the ingredients you have to simultaneously try and bring alive. So the fact that you found that and that illumination is awesome, because quite often we find some founders never get to that point and then get even more and more frustrated because they whip themselves thinking that they can do everything. But actually, whether it's Traction or any of the other models, all they're really saying is there's different things you got to split up, and you can't do all of it, and you got to find people that you can indoctrinate into it.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And I think also drawing that thread a little bit further is that there are some things that you are going to always have to do some of the pointy or the original thinking on. It's how do you then create a culture and an environment where you can hand those over, and the people who can take those and build those out further and feel that they have the space. One of the dark sides of one of my better attributes, I bring a lot of energy to everything I do. I'm visionary, I'm creative, I can do stuff. And I lead by being a part of that with the team. But the darks, and they can love that, but the dark side of that is then how do you, and I do this poorly, I suspect, give them the space and the confidence that they can take it and do it themselves. Now, I know that I'm totally happy to hand it over and off you go, and possibly to a fault sometimes. So for me, trying to get the balance right on that, which is the feedback I've had sometimes is, where did the sunshine go? I'm missing the sunshine. And so I'll pour that out on people, and then they can miss that when I'm raising capital or all those things. And so that I find that's one of the hardest things for me as a startup founder, is my personality, my charisma, my love, my purpose, all of those things draw great people in, but the business needs to be able to sustain without that as well. So the culture has to be able to extend beyond the founder. I'm sure you would see this all the time. So any great tips you've got for me, I'm all ears.
Well, I think one of you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, you talked about systems thinking, I can see it, why can't others come into seeing it as easily? And one of the challenges for this style, one of the things I'd love to unpack with you one day, is the thing that gives me the problem with ADHD, like disorder. Like, why can't it just be the way certain people are, just like quiet people are them? Like a non-entrepreneurial person who doesn't have an entrepreneurial bone in their body, we don't call them disordered and then suggest they go down a different path. They're just more administratively minded, but creative types that talk too much are somehow disordered. But anyway, that we won't get off track.
Don, I think it's bang on though, right? And if you think about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the extent of the divergence, the neurodiversity is a tremendous feature. So I can understand this. What I learnt working in larger corporations the hard way was that I've got to slow down and take the time for the linear people, right? To go, because they can't make the leap.
We tend not to put medication plans in front of the linear people. That's all.
Yeah, I was looking around for mine before, just going, did I take my meds this morning or not? I'm feeling like maybe I didn't. But anyway, I think I actually think it's important to talk about this, because I'm actually just really offended that it's called a disorder. And so we drop that D off in our household, right? Because I just think,
why can't it just be H? Like, it's just attention and hyperactivity sometimes, and
No,
then
no. The whole thing needs to go because it doesn't make sense. So we don't have a deficit of attention. We actually have an oversupply of attention to everything. That's actually the thing. The H is not about hyperactivity. It's just about hyper focus. It's why people with ADHD make great entrepreneurs. It's that hyper focus. We're the only insane people who can go so deep into something for 3-5 years and think of nothing else. That is a superpower. The hyper can be different things. I'm hypersensitive to light. I'm hypersensitive to touch, to certain touch. I'm hypersensitive to smell. But I'm also hyper aware of different types of communication. So I have very high affective communication, which I know you do too, Don, from even just watching you. So going into a cafe for a meeting is not the best place for me because I am literally listening to, I can hear every other conversation. The other day, I was catching up with an investor in Melbourne, going for a nice lunch, and I suddenly I realized I literally couldn't look her in the eyes. I was deeply engaged in the conversation, but I couldn't look her in the eyes because if I looked her in the eyes, then I can't gather my thoughts. It's too distracting for me. But I know, I've now know that's rude.
Your collective comments are true, right? We talk about the neurodiversity aspect a lot because we don't see it as a disorder or a deficit. It just is. And I absolutely think the entrepreneurial community over-index in these things that other people see as a deficit or a disorder. Our thing is about just making it more present and exposing it a little bit more so that people would just become self-aware about it. Because when you're self-aware about it, and it explains certain ways of thinking or explains certain behaviors, I've gone through the same thing myself, also adult diagnosed as autistic. It just allows a whole bunch of things to slot into where it makes sense. And it allows you to be a bit more aware of the way that you approach the world, which may be different to other people, so that you can then either compensate for it or build structures around you that put people in place who have strengths that you don't, or allows you to take advantage of superpowers that I think it does confer on a few people. And so it's just about awareness. It's not about labels.
For me, it doesn't matter what style methodology you use, right? I like PAEI. You can use DISC. You mentioned another one before. 90% of it comes from Carl Jung 100 years ago. It's all leveraged off the same thing. But there are certain traits, and some of those traits overlap. And Aaron and I compared notes on a whole lot of different bits and pieces. I think to defend the medical profession a little bit is that I think disorder creeps in is when it starts to cause pain to you and pain to others. But once you have a bit of, I guess, context for some of those things, sometimes it doesn't make it any easier. But you mentioned before you had a reason to get out of bed sometimes. And one of the things is when you're not in that dopamine loop and you just can't find the dopamine anymore, that's a natural response. So you've got to try and create something that gets you moving. But if people could understand that is actually just a biological thing and it's just something that you've got to get on top of. And often I think it's also because we're making a decision that we want to be on the edge a little bit. Like when I get myself into a bit of a pickle, it's because I am making a choice to actually spin a few plates, and I could dial it back, but I partly choose not to, and that's not the life that I want to live. And so you've got to find that balance. That can be hard.
Yeah, balance. I didn't even know there was that thing, but yeah, look, I totally agree. I think for me, I'm not sure if I'm going to say struggle with, but something I'm absolutely conscious of and think about a lot as a founder, as a leader of a team, as a mother, is my impact on others around me and consciousness of that. So I'm conscious of the positive impacts, the joy, the laughter, the adventure, those sorts of things. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that I can blow everybody up with me. I'm astonished. I'm just like, what are they doing? We're not done yet. Like, where are they? What do you mean what, you need a holiday? What? But do you know, that sort of stuff. But then also, I also have a culture in the business. I'm not sure if it's right or not, but everybody's welcome to say, Trenna, have you taken your meds? And if they ask that, I genuinely will wonder if I have or not and check that out. But also it's a reminder, you're being a bit much at the moment. It's time to dial that back and so on. And so I'm aware that I have the power to have a very positive impact, but also there is a dark side to that as well, and trying to be cognizant and patient and self-aware.
I think that's why this is a really important conversation for us to have as an ecosystem, because for mentors, for investors, for co-founders, for team members, for all of us to understand how different styles play out, how different patterns of behavior play out, how to manage that, how to have those conversations. Like, it's beautiful that you've created that environment where your team can give you a feedback mechanism or a point of conversation. But I think we need to have so many more of these conversations, and all of us learn more. And even this conversation, I'm learning more with my co-founders. Oh, I could better show up and better communicate. So even this conversation has been useful for me.
The conversations are very useful, but the problem is those around you sometimes suffer significant stigma challenges. And on some of it can come from a self-blame kind of thing. Some of it can be, how am I then going to be judged by others? And then some of it is a fear of, oh, okay, I thought this was just some short-term quirks. Am I strapping myself to a rocket ship that wasn't disclosed? So the challenge is you're simultaneously trying to process and do all these other bits and pieces whilst also being incredibly empathetic and mindful of others.
It's hard, right? So I talked about the vibrant internal conversation, and I was astonished to learn that not everybody has that going on. Like, it's literally impossible. It's literally impossible for me to imagine a world where there is any quiet time. And my brain is always searching. It's always considering. It's always thinking. It's very self-critical. It taps into decades of feeling uncomfortable, being the recipient of some pretty brutal bullying and criticism, jokes as well that are meant to be funny, and they are, but they aren't. I'm a deeply sensitive, deep thinking person. And so for me, the challenge there as well is, how do you keep putting yourself out there? How do you keep doing that and look after yourself a little bit and be okay? And so the way that I describe that to my husband is, I go, I don't want to be an idiot, but I just don't want to let the world rub the shine off me. So I want to be able to go out with my shine, but I want to go out and still be resilient and okay. And yeah, I think I'm a little bit like the Terminator meets Mary Poppins in a way, right? So I'm like the Terminator. I just keep going and going and going, but I'm actually...
That may be the most accurate description anyone's ever made of you, Trenna. That is the best. That's awesome. I'm conscious of time, and I'm sad that we even have to wrap up this conversation. So we might have to do a part 2. But I do want to give you an opportunity as well to talk a little bit about Super Fierce, because I do think what you're building is so important and provides, you mentioned the impact that you've had already on your customers. I'd just love if for the last 5 minutes you could talk about exactly what the mission is at Super Fierce and what you're looking forward to in the next little while.
Yeah, thank you. So touching on that really quickly, Super Fierce really started as my personal experience in my 30s, where despite having many opportunities, despite having a successful career, despite understanding money, despite understanding math, I had to start my life again, and I was in a very vulnerable position. And so it was really that experience, but also recognizing that somehow I have this little internal engine and opportunities and gifts that have enabled me to step past those challenges, and to recognize that I have access to lived experience and empathy, but also access to some knowledge and skills and capabilities that I think can come together to create simple solutions that are going to make it easier for women, but not just women, for all people to have greater choice in life. It's not a secret that I don't care that much about money, right? I'm not jazzed by finance, what I do, but I don't really care about it that much. It's the intellectual exercise that's interesting to me. But the way that I could get interested in it is that I understand, and I'm astonished when I say this to women that they don't get this, that money is just a tool, right? It's just a tool. And yet it's so emotional for people. It's such a controlling force in a negative way in people's life. And I want to flip the dial on that. I want people to understand that having financial resilience, having confidence is the power of choice. I want to give women the power of choice to stay or to leave, to have children or not have children, to work part-time, full-time, sit on the couch eating Cheetos in their husband's wire fronts. I don't fucking care, right? Super fierce for me is an exclamation mark. It's the end of any sentence which says, I'm under control. I know what I'm doing. I get to live life on my own. So why did we start with Super? What we've actually built is a digital advice platform. So at the heart of our platform, and this is not immediately evident because of the way that we went to market initially with the B2C offer, and that was very deliberate because we knew we had a lot of work to do. But what I wanted to do was to be really gathering insights and learnings and making money, hopefully, at the same time with the people who would be the ultimate customers of everything that we would build, whether it was B2C, B2B2C, or B2B. So at the heart of our platform is a single topic digital advice engine. So what does that mean? It means layers and layers of our own financial IP, our own technology, all combined so that we can quickly unravel the complexity of financial products. People can put in a bit of information and they instantly get a digital statement of advice. So we have I have to have a sip of water. So I've been talking too much. So we have a full AFSL. So our platform is a personal advice platform. We've got a full AFSL, which means we can build products and provide advice across every pillar of wealth other than foreign exchange. Why would you? Don't care. But so the power of this platform, though, is that on average to access personal advice is $3,500–4,500. Less than 10% of Australians are accessing traditional financial advice. It's just not an option. So we're ignoring 90% of the population. And here's a strong tip. Financial education alone is not enough. People need tools, they need support, they need advice. So what we've done with the way that we've built the platform, we handcraft all of the data. We build the algorithms, we build the tech. So somebody puts in their information, the platform instantly runs a minimum of 180,000 calculations, comparing more than 2,000 investment options from more than 350 funds and a whole range of other factors that we don't have time to talk about today, but to build not just this digital statement of advice, so a legal financial product, advice product, not just recommending which super fund so that you can be in a better position, but we've built a digital investment scenario builder in there so that now you actually get a custom investment portfolio, which is optimizing the balance of growth and defensive assets that is appropriate for you. And there's so much more to that, obviously, but the key point there is that we are all about empowering individuals. We're all about democratizing. It's not a very sexy way to say it, but I wouldn't say it normally, but it's about democratizing economic security. And we led with the B2C product. We've got some really interesting projects running at the moment. If I can pull them off, happy days. Let's see, wish me luck. So the commercialization of the data. We've built this digital advice engine. So we're working with a partner on how we can integrate that into a super accelerator so that the super funds could have access to that. All those sorts of things. My ultimate goal, though, is I want to make appropriate, affordable advice accessible to everyone around the world, in particular women, because we need that help.
Democratizing economic security, I think, is such a great way to frame it, Trenna. And we'll put in our show notes, your website. But I think we do need to get you on again, because I think we'd love to unpack some of the elements of that business, because I think it's actually incredibly important to explain how this works, because I do think you're right. Not a lot of people do understand it and need to be a bit more informed about it. So we'll get you on after your holiday for a part 2.
Or someone who's good at marketing can come and help us with that. That'd be awesome. It is interesting, right? So people look at me, I know we're wrapping up, but people look at me from the outside and they go, okay, she's a marketing person, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm just not, right? I'm probably a good salesperson. I'm a financial engineer. I'm a
Even if you were, a good lawyer never represents themselves and a doctor never operates on one of their own children. You can't solve your own shit. You've got to get others assisting. So we will do that shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. Trenna, thank you so much for coming on our podcast today, and most importantly for being so vulnerable and transparent about your path, especially over the last 12 months. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful to a lot of people who listen. The 6 people who listen to this podcast will get a lot out of it.
Well, let's work on that as well.
No, it's only,
look, I really
only
appreciate
5.
it. I really do. I think it's important. I want other founders to know, if there's one thing that comes out of this, I want other founders to know that everybody is doing it tough. Everyone I speak to is doing it tough in one way or another. And I know you feel alone. We all feel alone, but we're actually not. So even just finding just one person that you can be honest with about this stuff, who's lived this journey, because that is the hard thing. Your family doesn't understand. Your friends don't understand. You don't end up with any friends, right? And it's even the people who really want to, unless you've actually been on this journey, you just can't get it. So make sure you've got one person, just one person you feel you can be really honest with, who gets it. I think that's important.
Great tip.
Yeah,
right.
Awesome. Great advice.
Well, enjoy Bali. We look forward to seeing you when you get back. And until
over, like, why don't you guys come on over? It'd be awesome.
I would love to.
Asked you.
I know you have, yes, and I'm sad that I can't, but I do hope that you get some rest and recharging from this process, because I think you very much deserve it.
Well, what I'm most excited about is the things that make me happiest are eating, swimming, reading, listening to music, and cuddling my children and writing and stuff. So I feel like it's just going to be the perfect recipe.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Trenna.
Enjoy
your holiday.
Bye. Have a great day.